Imagine waking up in the morning, but not in 2025. You open your eyes in the year right in the middle of the medieval ages. The first sound you hear? Screams of agony from your neighbor being treated by the local doctor. The first smell that hits your nose? A mixture of human waste, rotting animal carcasses, and smoke from burning corpses. Welcome to a world where things we consider horrifying were just normal, everyday life. Today, we're going to uncover 7 shocking facts about the medieval ages that will make you grateful to be living in modern times. And trust me, Fact number 1. Alone is enough to keep you awake tonight. Fact 1. Terrifying medical practices. The medieval doctor has a solution. Lobotomy with a wooden drill. Patients would watch in horror as these creatures grew fat on their blood, turning pale as ghosts in the process. You have a headache, but wait, That's not even the worst part. People literally had a better chance of survival by doing absolutely nothing than seeking medical help. Are nothing compared to fact number 2 we're about to discuss. Get ready, because what you're about to hear next will change the way you look at hygiene forever. They believed that diseases were caused by bad blood in your body. He makes deep cuts on your arms and legs, watching as your life force literally drains away. They believed this would balance your humors and cure everything from depression to broken bones. The solution? They would cut open your blood vessels and let the blood flow until you nearly passed out. The name of this practice, bloodletting. Picture this. You're lying on a wooden table. No anesthesia, no painkillers. The barber surgeon approaches with a rusty blade. But if knives weren't available, they used leeches. Dozens of blood-sucking leeches attached to your body, their slimy bodies swelling as they drained you dry. Doctors would examine your urine, taste it, and then prescribe drinking more urine as treatment. They believed different colors and tastes indicated different diseases. And here's the most shocking part. They used urine as medicine. Yes, you heard that right? Surgery. Forget about it. They performed amputations with carpenter's saws while patients were fully conscious, biting down on leather straps. The lucky ones passed out from pain. Most died from shock or infection within days. The mortality rate for these treatments was over 80%. But these terrifying medical practices. Fact 2. Horrifying hygiene practices. Think taking a shower every day is normal? In medieval times, bathing was considered dangerous and sinful. Here's the shocking truth. Most people bathed only once a year. You heard that right. Once a year. The Catholic Church taught that being naked, even for bathing, was a sin against God. They believed that dirt and body odor were signs of holiness and purity. Rich people paid good money for fresh urine because they believed it had cleaning properties. The ammonia in urine was actually effective. But imagine the smell. The grease, the lice, the smell so putrid that flies would swarm around your head. Medieval people's hair was so filthy it literally moved on its own from all the insects living in it. Their mouths were graveyards of decay, with breath so foul it could knock you unconscious. They would deliberately blacken their teeth with soot to show they could afford sugar, which was extremely expensive, and rotted teeth quickly. The smellier you were, the more blessed you appeared to be. Picture this. Imagine not washing your hair for 365 days. But here's where it gets absolutely disgusting. They used urine to wash their clothes and even brush their teeth. What's coming next will make you realize that being dirty was the least of their problems. And their teeth? Forget about dental hygiene. Rotting, black teeth were actually considered fashionable among the wealthy. The poor, ironically, had better teeth because they couldn't afford sugar. But the rich, women used lead-based makeup that literally poisoned their skin, creating open sores and permanent scarring. They thought pale, diseased-looking skin was beautiful. Many died from lead poisoning, but beauty standards demanded this deadly look. Public bathhouses, when they existed, were cesspools of disease. Dozens of people would share the same dirty water, spreading everything from syphilis to the plague. The water was changed maybe once a week, if they were lucky. But if you think medieval hygiene was bad, wait until you hear about their justice system. Fact 3. Brutal justice system. You think our legal system is flawed? Medieval justice was literally trial by torture. Forget innocent until proven guilty. In medieval times, if you were accused of a crime, you were automatically considered guilty until you could prove your innocence through surviving torture. Here's how their justice worked. Trial by ordeal. They believed God would protect the innocent and punish the guilty through these horrific tests. Accused of theft, they would make you grab a red-hot iron bar with your bare hands. If your burns healed within 3 days without infection, you were innocent. If they festered and rotted, guilty. Most people's hands were permanently disfigured or they died from infection. For adultery, burned alive. For speaking against the king, drawn and quartered, they would tie your limbs to 4 horses and have them run in different directions, literally tearing your body apart while you were still conscious. But that's not even the worst part. Trial by water meant they would tie you up and throw you into a river or pond. If you floated, you were guilty of witchcraft and would be burned alive. The next fact will shatter everything you think you know about protecting children, ... They would tie you to a large wooden wheel and systematically break every bone in your body with iron hammers, starting with your fingers and toes, working their way up. This torture could last 4 days before you finally died. If you sank and drowned, congratulations, you were innocent. Either way, you were dead. Justice wasn't about rehabilitation or fairness. It was about creating fear through the most brutal spectacles imaginable. For more serious crimes, they used the breaking wheel. The punishment for stealing bread, death by hanging. Public executions were entertainment. Entire families would pack picnic lunches and watch people being tortured to death like it was a carnival. Children would cheer as criminals were disemboweled alive. The wealthy could buy their way out of punishment, but the poor faced these horrors for the smallest and here's the most twisted part. They believed this was all God's will, that these tortures were divine justice in action. But if you think medieval justice was savage, wait until you hear what they considered normal childhood. Fact 4. Horrifying childhood reality. Think childhood is supposed to be about playing and learning. In medieval times, childhood didn't exist. Here's the shocking reality. Children as young as 7 years old were considered adults and forced into backbreaking labor that would kill grown men today. Picture this. A 7-year-old boy working 16 hours a day in coal mines, crawling through tunnels so narrow that adults couldn't fit. Their small bodies were perfect for dangerous jobs, cleaning chimneys where they'd get stuck. Girls as young as 12 were sold by their families to much older men. These weren't symbolic ceremonies. These were real marriages with real expectations. Many girls died in childbirth because their bodies weren't developed enough to handle pregnancy and suffocate, working in textile mills where their tiny fingers could operate delicate machinery, often losing fingers or entire hands in the process. But here's where it gets absolutely heartbreaking. Child marriage was not just legal, it was encouraged. Boys, as young as 10, were sent to war, carrying weapons almost as big as themselves, watching their friends die horrible deaths on battlefields soaked in blood and gore. The next fact about medieval food will make you never complain about your meals again. The mortality rate for children was staggering. Out of 10 children born, only 3 would survive to see their 10th birthday. Parents didn't even name their babies until they were 2 years old, because death was so common. They didn't want to get emotionally attached. If a child died from overwork or abuse, it was considered God's will, and nobody was held accountable. Only the wealthy elite could afford to educate their children. They could be sold, traded, or given away like livestock. Parents would literally sell their children to pay debts or buy food. The rest learned through brutal apprenticeships, where they were essentially slaves to their masters. These apprentices were regularly beaten, sexually abused, and forced to work in conditions that would horrify modern prison wardens. Children had no protection from abuse. They could be beaten, starved, or worked to death with no legal consequences. Education? Forget about it. And here's the most disturbing part. Children were considered property, not people. Child soldiers were common. But if you think the treatment of children was barbaric, wait until you hear what they ate and drank every single day. Fact 5. Disgusting food and drink. Think eating expired food is gross. Medieval people ate rotting meat as a delicacy and drank beer for breakfast. Here's the stomach-churning truth. Meat was so rare and expensive that most people ate meat that had been rotting for weeks. They would cover the putrid smell and taste with massive amounts of expensive spices, not for flavor, but to mask the fact that the meat was literally crawling with maggots. But you eat it anyway, because it's the only protein you'll get for months. Picture this. You're sitting down for dinner and your fresh chicken has green patches, a smell that makes you gag, and visible worms moving through the flesh. But here's where it gets absolutely revolting. They had nitrogen, monoxide, refrigeration. Peacock served with all its feathers still attached. Swan stuffed with smaller birds in a grotesque display called and live birds baked into pies that would fly out when cut open, often defecating on the dinner guests. Even children drank beer for breakfast. Because water was so contaminated, it would kill you faster than alcohol poisoning. The same knife used to butcher animals was used to cut bread. The same hands that handled human waste would prepare food without washing. Cross-contamination wasn't just common. It was inevitable. The small beer they gave to kids was still 3 to 4% alcohol. Imagine giving your 5-year-old a beer with every meal. People just accepted that eating meant suffering. Meat was preserved by covering it in salt and hanging it in dark, damp cellars where rats and insects would feast on it. What's coming next will show you that their relationship with God was even more twisted than their relationship with food. By the time it reached your plate, it was more bacteria than actual meat. And what did they drink? Beer, all day long. The poor ate black bread made from whatever scraps they could find, sometimes including ground bones from dead animals. Fruits were considered dangerous and were avoided by anyone who could afford meat. The wealthy had slightly better options, but even they ate foods that would horrify us today. Bread, the staple food, was made with flour, so contaminated with rat droppings, insects, and sawdust that it was more like eating dirt than actual food. Vegetables. They believed raw vegetables caused disease, so everything was boiled into a mushy, flavorless paste. And here's the most disgusting part. They had nitrogen monoxide concept of food safety. Food poisoning was so frequent that violent stomach cramps, vomiting, and diarrhea were considered normal parts of daily life. But if you think medieval food was revolting, wait until you hear about their religious practices. Fact 6. Extreme religious practices. Think modern religion is intense. Medieval religious practices were literally self-torture in the name of God. This led to religious movements that would make horror movies look tame. They believed that by beating themselves bloody, they were taking on Christ's suffering and water, letting their own waste pile up around them until they were literally sitting in their own filth. They called this holy living. Picture hundreds of people walking through streets, their backs torn open, blood streaming down their legs, all while singing hymns and praising God. The Catholic Church published an official manual called Malleus Maleficarum, literally the hammer of witches, that gave detailed instructions on how to torture confessions out of suspected witches. Here's the terrifying truth. People believed that the more they suffered, the closer they got to heaven. Meet the flagellants groups of religious fanatics, who would march through towns whipping themselves until their backs were shredded raw meat. The demand was so high that grave robbers would dig up corpses and sell body parts as saint relics. They would burn people alive for questioning church doctrine, believing that if God wanted to save them, he would make them fireproof. Thousands of people were burned at the stake while crowds cheered, thinking they were witnessing divine justice. Churches displayed rotting human remains as objects of worship. Christian armies would march into cities and slaughter everyone, men, women, children, even other Christians who looked different. They would literally wade through streets, ankle deep in blood, believing they were doing God's work. The final fact will show you that even their most basic human needs were met in ways that would traumatize us today. But that's just the beginning. Some monks practiced extreme asceticism. They would chain themselves to walls for years, never moving, eating only bread. And here's where it gets absolutely insane. Witch hunting was considered a sacred duty. Picture this. An old woman who knew herbal medicine would be accused of witchcraft. They would strip her naked, shave off all her body, hair looking for devil's marks, then torture her with red-hot irons, crushing devices. They convinced thousands of children that their innocence would part the Mediterranean Sea, like Moses parted the Red Sea. These children marched to their deaths, most dying of starvation, disease, or being sold into slavery. The church called it divine will, and water torture until she confessed to flying on broomsticks and having sex with demons. If she died during torture, she was obviously guilty. If she survived, also guilty. The Crusades were sold as holy wars, but they were actually genocidal massacres. But here's the most twisted part. Child crusades. Religious relics became a sick obsession. People would pay fortunes for pieces of holy bones, hair, or clothing. And the most horrifying practice of all. Trial by fire for heretics. But if you think medieval religious extremism was the worst part of their lives, wait until you hear about their daily living conditions. Fact 7. Horrifying daily living conditions. Think your living situation is bad. Medieval people lived in conditions so disgusting that modern prison cells would seem like luxury hotels. Here's the revolting reality. Most families shared one room with their livestock. Yes, you heard that right. Cows, pigs, chickens, and goats lived inside the house with the entire family. Instead, they used garderobes, basically holes in the wall that dropped waste directly onto the street below. Picture walking down a medieval street and having human excrement fall on your head from second-story windows. This wasn't an accident. It was the normal way to dispose of waste. Imagine trying to sleep while a pig defecates 3 feet from your bed, and chickens roost above your head, dropping waste on you all night long. But that's just the beginning of this nightmare. They had nitrogen monoxide toilets, human waste, animal carcasses, and industrial pollution. In winter, families would choose between freezing to death or suffocating from smoke, because heating meant burning anything they could find indoors, filling their homes with toxic fumes. Most people died from diseases that are easily treatable today. A simple cut could lead to gangrene and death. Childbirth was essentially a death sentence for many women. You have access to clean water, modern medicine, and sanitation systems that would seem like magic to people from the past. The stench was so overwhelming that people carried small bouquets of flowers just to have something pleasant to smell. And here's where it gets absolutely they had no concept that life could be any different. What we consider basic human dignity, clean water, sanitation, privacy, medical care, were luxuries beyond their wildest imagination. Not just parents and children, but grandparents, aunts, uncles, and even servants. Sometimes 8 to 10 people crammed into one flea-infested mattress made of straw and animal hair. Wells were often built next to cemeteries, so people were literally drinking water mixed with decomposing corpses. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid were as common as the common cold is today. Privacy didn't exist. Intimacy happened while children and relatives were lying right next to you. The Black Death killed 1/3 of Europe's population. But even before that, people lived with open sores, festering wounds, invisible parasites crawling on their skin. Lice, fleas, and worms were so common that people just accepted them as part of life. The floors were covered with rushes, basically dried grass, that was never changed. For months, these rushes would accumulate food scraps, animal waste, human vomit, dead insects, and rotting organic matter. The smell was so putrid that visitors would literally faint upon entering homes. But here's the most horrifying part. Plague and disease were constant companions. Water sources were contaminated with human waste, dead animals, and industrial runoff. And the smell, imagine the worst smell you've ever encountered. Then multiply it by 1,000. Medieval cities reeked of rotting flesh. Windows had no glass, just holes in the wall, covered with animal skins or wooden shutters. Life expectancy was 30 to 35 years, and that was if you were lucky. But perhaps the most tragic part of all, they thought this was normal. So the next time you complain about your Wi-Fi being slow or your coffee being cold, remember, you're living better than medieval kings ever dreamed possible. The medieval period wasn't a romantic time of knights and castles. It was a brutal, disgusting, and terrifying existence that makes our worst days look like paradise. Closing. So there you have it, 7 shocking facts about medieval life that prove we're reliving in the most incredible time in human history. From doctors who killed more patients than they saved, 2 children sold into slavery at age 7, 2 people literally living in their own filth with farm animals. The medieval period was a nightmare that lasted for centuries. But here, is truly mind-blowing. The people living through this horror had no idea how bad their lives actually were. You turn a handle and clean. Drinkable water flows out. You flip a switch, and darkness becomes light. You get sick, and instead of dying, you take a pill and get better. You have privacy, education, and the freedom to choose your own path in life. And that's actually a beautiful thing. It means we've built a world so much better than our ancestors could have ever imagined. They thought this was just normal. They couldn't imagine a world with clean water, modern medicine, or basic human rights, because those concepts didn't even exist yet. Came home to sleep with pigs, drank beer for breakfast, because water would kill him, and died at 30 from a tooth infection. Every single day, you experience miracles that medieval people would have considered impossible. The next time you think you're having a bad day, remember the medieval peasant who worked 16 hours in the fields. Your worst day is still infinitely better than their best day ever was. Let me know in the comments below, and if you want to see more mind-blowing historical content like this, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. History is full of stories that will change the way you see the world forever. We've come so far as a species that we've literally forgotten how brutal life used to be. So appreciate what you have. because you're living like royalty compared to 99% of all humans who ever existed. What did you think of these medieval facts? Which one shocked you the most? Because trust me,